It was 11:47 p.m. on a rain-soaked Friday night when Sarah Chen's phone vibrated across her desk. The 29-year-old software engineer had been working late in her downtown apartment, surrounded by the soft glow of her laptop screen and the distant hum of city traffic below. She assumed it was a work email or perhaps a food delivery notification. But when she glanced at the screen, her blood turned cold. The message was from Danny, her younger brother Danny, whose funeral she had attended just 3 days earlier after a fatal motorcycle accident on Highway 101. The text was simple, achingly familiar. Check the stove before bed. Love you, sis. Sarah's hands began to tremble. Danny had always teased her about her forgetfulness, always reminded her about mundane safety checks that she routinely overlooked. It had been their running joke, their sibling shorthand. With her heart pounding, she rushed to the kitchen. There, still burning with a low blue flame, was the gas burner she'd left on hours earlier after making dinner, completely forgotten. Sarah collapsed against the kitchen counter, phone clutched in her shaking hands, staring at a message that defied everything she understood about life, death, and the technology that connected them. The question that would haunt her for months had already begun to form. Was this real? Sarah Chen's experience was not unique. In fact, by the time she sat down at her laptop 3 weeks later to search for answers, she discovered she was one of hundreds who had reported nearly identical encounters. The search led her to a 2023 study that had been quietly circulating in academic circles, largely ignored by mainstream science but creating ripples in communities of the bereaved. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a parapsychologist at Stanford University, had spent the better part of 2 decades documenting what she called post-mortem electronic communication. Her research partner, James Whitmore, brought a different perspective entirely. A former telecommunications engineer with 20 years at AT&T, Whitmore had stumbled into this field after his own sister died and his phone rang 3 times in the middle of the night, displaying her number on the caller ID, though the line had been disconnected weeks earlier. Together, they had compiled 247 documented cases, each one meticulously verified, cross-referenced, and analyzed. What emerged from their data was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. The phenomenon fell into 2 distinct categories. The first involved what Vasquez termed fragmentary signals, brief, incomplete communications that lasted only seconds. A single text message, a phone that rings once, then goes silent, a voicemail containing nothing but static and what might be a whispered word. These accounted for roughly 60% of all reported cases. The second category was far more complex, sustained interactions. Full conversations lasting 5, 10, sometimes 15 minutes. Video calls where the deceased appeared on screen, speaking coherently about events they couldn't possibly know about. These cases were rarer, comprising the remaining 40%, but they were also the most thoroughly documented and the most difficult to explain away. Across both categories, certain patterns emerged with startling consistency. Nearly every case involved some form of audio or visual distortion, voices that sounded metallic or distant, video feeds plagued by pixelation or strange color shifts. The vast majority occurred within 72 hours of death, with the highest concentration happening in the first 24 hours. And perhaps most puzzling of all were the technical impossibilities. Phones ringing despite being disconnected from service, text messages arriving from numbers that had been deactivated, transmissions occurring during documented power outages. But it was the metadata mystery that truly baffled Whitmore. As a telecommunications engineer, he knew how to trace signals, how to pool records, how to follow the digital breadcrumbs that every call and text message inevitably left behind. Yet when he contacted carriers, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, requesting logs for these specific communications, he encountered the same response every time. No record exists. The calls weren't in the system. The texts had never been transmitted through any tower. It was as if the messages had materialized from nowhere, bypassing the entire infrastructure of modern telecommunications. "We're not dealing with conventional signals," Whitmore explained in his research notes. "Whatever is happening here, it's not using the networks we built. It's something else entirely." Marcus Webb had been driving for 18 hours straight when his CB radio crackled to life at 2:30 in the morning. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly in all directions, his headlights carving a narrow tunnel through the darkness. At 54, Marcus knew these roads like the lines on his own palms. Every truck stop, every lonely stretch of asphalt, every place where cell service dropped to nothing. He'd received the call from his brother 6 hours earlier. Diane had finally lost her battle with cancer. Marcus had turned his rig around immediately, abandoning a delivery route to make the emergency drive home to Oregon. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Grief sat in his chest like a stone, heavy and suffocating. The voice that emerged from the CB speaker stopped his breath entirely. "You did everything right. Don't speed. I'll wait." It was Diane's voice. Not a memory, not his imagination. Her actual voice, with that slight rasp she'd developed in the final months, the one that made her sound like she'd just woken up. Marcus's foot eased off the accelerator instinctively, his eyes darting to the radio. The message repeated, identical in every inflection. "You did everything right. Don't speed. I'll wait." Then again, a third time, before dissolving into a hiss of static that gradually faded to silence. His first thought was cruel and immediate. Someone was playing a sick joke. Some bastard trucker who'd somehow heard about Diane, recorded her voice from an old video, and decided to torture a grieving man on the loneliest stretch of highway in America. The rage that flooded through him was white-hot, primal. But as the miles passed and his fury cooled to confusion, the impossibilities began to stack up. Marcus knew CB radio culture. He'd been part of it for 30 years. Nobody was on this frequency. Channel 19 was the trucker standard. He'd switched to 23 for the quiet. He grabbed his radio and called out, asking if anyone was in range. Nothing but static answered him. When he finally pulled into a truck stop near Winnemucca, Marcus sat in his cab and forced himself to think clearly. That's when the truly haunting detail surfaced in his memory. Diane's message, "You did everything right." That phrase felt specific, too specific. It wasn't something she'd said often. And then he remembered. Those were almost the exact words his brother David had used when he'd called to tell Marcus about Diane's passing. David had said, "You did everything you could, Marcus. You did everything right." That conversation had happened while Marcus was already driving, 4 hours after Diane had died. There was no recording of it, no video where she'd said those words. If someone was playing a cruel prank, how could they possibly have known? The truth settled over him slowly, impossible and undeniable. Diane had somehow reached across that final divide to deliver one last message. Not goodbye. She'd already said goodbye in the hospital 3 days earlier. This was something different. This was permission to let go, delivered at the exact moment when Marcus's grief threatened to send him careening off the road at 90 miles per hour. The message had slowed him down. Quite possibly, It had saved his life. Sunday dinner at the Rivera household had always been Abuela Rosa's tradition. Even 2 weeks after her death, Maria couldn't bring herself to abandon the ritual. So there they sat around the dining table in their Los Angeles home, Maria, her husband Carlos, and their 3 children, passing plates of arroz con pollo and trying to fill the grandmother-shaped hole in their weekly gathering. The tablet had been sitting on the kitchen counter all evening, dark and silent. Maria's daughter Sofia had been using it earlier for homework, but she'd closed it and left it there, forgotten. None of them were paying attention to it when the screen suddenly illuminated with a soft glow, casting blue light across the kitchen tiles. The video call interface appeared without anyone touching the device. At first, Maria thought Sofia had left an app running, some glitch triggering a random connection. But then the face materialized on the screen, grainy and distorted like an old television signal struggling through a storm. It was Abuela Rosa, Salgan de la Casa Ahora, the image said, her voice crackling with static. Gas. Get out of the house now. Gas. Carlos was the first to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is sick, he muttered, moving toward the tablet. Someone hacked us. Someone is playing a recording. But then Rosa's face shifted slightly, as if focusing. Maria, tu cabello nuevo se ve hermoso. Your new haircut looks beautiful. Maria's hand flew instinctively to her hair. She'd gotten it cut yesterday afternoon, on impulse, at a salon she'd never been to before. Carlos, the interview went well, didn't it? They will call you back. Carlos had interviewed for a new position that very morning. He'd told Maria about it over coffee at 11 a.m., hours after Rosa's funeral, days after her death. His face went pale. Mama, Maria whispered, taking a step closer to the screen. No time. Mija. Gas leak. Take the children. Go now. The image began to fragment, pixels scattering like digital snow, but not before Maria registered one final, impossible detail. This wasn't a photograph from Rosa's younger days, wasn't some video recorded before she got sick. The face on the screen showed Rosa as she had been in her final months, 87 years old, with the deep lines around her eyes and the gray hair pulled back the way she'd worn it in the nursing home. Sofia started crying. The 2 younger children, 12-year-old Miguel and 9-year-old Anna, looked terrified. Carlos made the decision for all of them, grabbing his keys and ushering everyone toward the front door. They stood on the sidewalk, Maria's phone already dialing 911, when the fire department arrived 16 minutes later. The firefighters swept the house with gas detectors, their equipment screaming almost immediately when they reached the basement stairs. The technician who emerged looked shaken. You've got a slow leak from your water heater, he explained. Based on the concentration levels, by tomorrow morning this would have been catastrophic. How did you know? Carlos couldn't answer. He just looked at Maria, who looked at the children, who looked back at the house. Later that night, after the gas company had made emergency repairs and they'd been cleared to return home, Carlos picked up the tablet from the kitchen counter. He checked the Wi-Fi settings. Disconnected. Sofia had turned it off earlier to save battery. He checked the call history. Empty. No record of any incoming connection. The screen was completely blank, as if nothing had happened at all. Jessica Palmer had been a hospital nurse for 9 years, long enough that follow-up calls had become second nature. She'd worked through her checklist that Wednesday afternoon with practiced efficiency, calling discharged patients to check on medication schedules, answer questions, ensure nobody was experiencing complications at home. At 3:15 p.m., she dialed Theodore Matsuda's number, pen poised over her notepad. The phone rang 3 times before he answered. "Mr. Matsuda, this is Jessica Palmer from St. Catherine's Hospital. I'm calling to check in on your medication schedule." His voice came through clearly, though he sounded tired. "Oh yes, Jessica. Thank you for calling." They developed a rapport during his 2-week stay in the cardiac unit. Teddy was one of those patients who remembered everyone's name, who asked about your day even when he was the one hooked up to monitors. The conversation lasted 5 minutes. Jessica walked him through his prescriptions, reminded him about his follow-up appointment the next week, asked about any symptoms or concerns. Teddy mentioned his daughter had been staying with him, helping out. He talked about his grandchildren visiting over the weekend, how good it had been to see them all together. His voice carried that particular quality of exhaustion that comes after a long hospital stay, but he was coherent, responsive, present. "You took such good care of me," he said near the end of the call. "I want you to know that. I finally feel at peace." Jessica had smiled, making a note in her records. "That's wonderful to hear, Mr. Matsuda. You take care of yourself, okay?" "I will. Thank you, Jessica." She'd hung up feeling satisfied with the call, moved on to the next name on her list, finished her shift, and gone home thinking nothing of it. The next morning, Teddy's daughter called the hospital. Jessica could hear the confusion and distress in her voice before she even finished her first sentence. "Why is St. Catherine's calling my father about appointments? His funeral was yesterday. He died Tuesday morning." Jessica felt the floor tilt beneath her. "I'm sorry. There must be some mistake. I spoke with your father yesterday afternoon at 3:15. We had a full conversation about his medications." "That's impossible." The daughter's voice cracked. "My father died at 11 a.m. on Tuesday. I was with him. The hospice nurse documented the time. His funeral was Wednesday at noon. You couldn't have talked to him at 3:15 p.m. because we were at the cemetery." Jessica pulled up her records with shaking hands. There was her note, time-stamped 3:15 p.m. Wednesday. She documented the entire conversation, medication review completed, patient reports feeling at peace, follow-up scheduled. But when the hospital administrator pulled the phone system logs at the daughter's insistence, there was nothing. No outgoing call to Teddy's number at 3:15 p.m. or any other time that day. "I don't understand," Jessica whispered to her supervisor later, after the daughter had hung up, after the impossible timeline had been verified and re-verified. "I heard his voice. We talked about his grandchildren. He told me about them visiting over the weekend." She looked up, desperate for someone to believe her. "He thanked me for taking care of him. He said he finally felt at peace." Her supervisor had no answer. The call that Jessica Palmer had documented in meticulous detail, the conversation she could replay word for word in her memory, had occurred 16 hours after Theodore Matsuda's death. And somehow, impossibly, he had reached across that divide to deliver one final message of gratitude and closure to the nurse who had cared for him in his final days. Dr. Elena Vasquez was the first to acknowledge what her critics had been saying for years. There was no physical evidence, no call logs, no metadata, no electromagnetic signatures that could be measured and replicated in a laboratory. Every case in her research existed only in the testimony of the bereaved, in the raw certainty of people who insisted they had heard voices, seen faces, received messages from beyond the boundary of death. Grief does strange things to the human mind, she admitted during a conference presentation in late 2024. The brain, desperate for closure, can manufacture experiences that feel absolutely real. We know this. We account for it in our research. James Whitmore stood beside her, arms crossed, his engineering background evident in his measured response. But we also have to account for the cases that don't fit the hallucination model, the technical impossibilities, the specific knowledge that the deceased couldn't have possessed at the time of death, the simultaneous experiences reported by multiple witnesses. Their alternative theory was both simpler and more radical. Perhaps consciousness, at the moment of transition between life and death, retained some capacity to manipulate electromagnetic fields. Not through conventional means, not through cell towers and fiber optic cables, but through something science hadn't yet learned to measure. A final discharge of energy, focused by love and urgency, finding its way through the invisible networks that surround us all. The Harrison twins had become the cornerstone of their argument. Emma and Olivia Harrison, 19 years old, were attending different universities in different states when their father suffered a massive heart attack in his Ohio home at 11:43 p.m. on a Thursday night. He died alone, collapsing in his kitchen before he could reach the phone to call for help. His body wasn't discovered until the next morning when a neighbor noticed his car still in the driveway long after he should have left for work. But at 12:07 a.m. that same night, 24 minutes after their father's death and hours before either twin had been notified, both Emma in California and Olivia in Massachusetts received identical voicemails on their phones. The timestamp was exact, simultaneous. The message was the same on both recordings. Their father's voice, strained but clear, saying, "I'm okay. Tell your mother I'm not in pain." The phones were examined by forensic experts at the FBI's request after the twins contacted authorities, convinced something impossible had occurred. The voicemails existed in the device's memory. The audio was authentic. Voice analysis confirmed it was indeed their father speaking. But the calls had originated from nowhere. His phone, found beside his body, showed no outgoing calls. The carrier networks had no record of any transmission. It was as if the message had materialized directly into both phones without ever traveling through the infrastructure designed to carry it. Dr. Vasquez had no explanation for how this was possible. Neither did Whitmore. Neither did anyone who examined the evidence. In the end, perhaps that was the point. Perhaps these signals, these impossible messages that arrive in our darkest moments, aren't meant to prove anything about the nature of death or consciousness or the persistence of love beyond the grave. Perhaps they are simply what they appear to be, final words from those we've lost, transmitted through the only language our modern world truly understands: electricity, signals, digital whispers in the static. For Emma and Olivia Harrison, for Sarah Chen, for Marcus Webb and the Rivera family and Jessica Palmer and Theodore Matsuda's spirit and countless others, the peace these messages brought was undeniably real. And maybe, in the end, that's the only truth that matters.